In the coded notebooks of medieval adepts, a brutal rule repeats like a spell. No gold without rot. They watched metal die into a black slurry and insisted the same law governs the inner life. Before anything luminous can be born, the old personality must darken, decompose, and lose its status as truth. They called this descent the Nigredo, blackening, an initiation that feels like failure, emptiness, even the end of meaning. This is a clinical diagnosis. It's a collapse staged by the psyche when the ego has hardened into a tyrant. What looks like ruin may be the beginning of reordering. The Hermetic dialogues, attributed to the thrice great sage, teach a universe of mirrors. What happens above echoes below. In that logic, the furnace is only in a laboratory. It's in you. The raw material is not lead, but the unredeemed substance of your own soul. Compulsions, traumas, unlived emotions, and the mask you call me. When your life turns black, will you flee or enter the vessel? A century ago, a quiet physician from Zurich began collecting strange engravings. Crowned kings dissolving, suns drowned in oceans, a serpent devouring itself. It looked like superstition until a pattern emerged. The adepts were mapping inner events, projected onto matter. Their operations were psychology written in salts, planets, and fire. In psychology and alchemy, he argues the unconscious speaks in images, not arguments. When a culture lacks a language for the soul, the psyche borrows what it has, metallurgy, theology, scripture, and hides its instructions there. The laboratory becomes a mirror. The real experiment happens in you. That's also why the books insist on secrecy, not to hoard power, but because symbols die when handled like facts. In the Nigredo, you don't understand darkness, you meet it. Relapse, obsession, the shattering of your self-story. And the Gnostics add a sharp clue. Liberation begins with gnosis, a direct knowing, usually preceded by the collapse of the false god you've been serving. The adepts begin with a humiliating admission. You don't choose the prima materia, it chooses you. Because whatever in your life refuses to be improved by willpower, the repeating relationship pattern, the private addiction, the rage you spiritualize, the sadness you keep productive to avoid feeling. Alchemy starts where your usual strategies stop working. They organize the work with a threefold key: a fiery principle of craving and will, a fluid principle of mind and metamorphosis, and a salted principle of embodiment, habit, bone, consequence. Not chemistry, a map. When the fiery part dominates, you burn your life down. When the fluid part dominates, you become clever but ungrounded, insight without change. When the salted part dominates, you fossilize, safe, rigid, numb. The great work is not escaping matter but redeeming it, letting spirit become concrete, and letting the body become meaningful. This is why the texts repeat one warning. Do the dissolution inside the vessel, without a container. Therapy, disciplined practice, honest community. The black phase spills into chaos. Here the Hermetic art collides with a deeper mystery. Transformation happens through opposites. Light and shadow, devotion and disgust, love and hatred. Each pair is a single force split in two. The old occult axiom says reality swings on polarity. Depth psychology calls it the tension of opposites. Either way, the psyche won't evolve by picking a side. It evolves by bearing the conflict without cheap relief. In Mysterium Conjunctionis, the Zurich doctor names the goal, the sacred joining, not a moral victory, but a new center that can contain contradictions without fracture. The psyche creates a third thing when the ego stops forcing conclusions. This is where most modern seekers fail. We solve discomfort with distractions. New ideologies, new lovers, new routines, new stimulants. But the old masters insist. Premature harmony creates counterfeit gold. The work requires what they call a mild, steady fire. A tension that does flinch. So the practice is deceptively simple and brutally hard. Stay conscious when your inner world polarizes. Don't repress. Don't project. Don't sermonize. Hold the strain until something true appears. An image, a dream, a sudden ethical clarity. This is why imagination becomes a discipline, not entertainment. The psyche speaks in symbols because symbols can hold what the rational mind cannot. Paradox, terror, longing, the holy and the grotesque in the same frame. The old manuals instruct the operator to converse with the images, not to believe them literally, nor to dismiss them, but to engage them as living realities of the soul. One method is what later depth work calls a dialogue with the inner figures. You return to a dream scene, you ask a question, you listen, you record what answers. Done correctly, it's neither fantasy nor trance. It's a controlled descent, a way to keep the vessel sealed while the contents heat. The archetypal psychologist who wrote Revisioning Psychology warns that modern culture is addicted to going upward, turning everything into transcendence. But the soul is not improved by rising above it. It's deepened by entering what we avoid. The descent is not failure. It's soul-making. So when the black phase arrives, when your world loses color, the question is, how do I get out? The alchemical question is, what is dying and what truth is being born beneath it? The work unfolds in recognizable moves. First comes the burning. The moment you can anesthetize pain anymore. Your distractions stop working. The heat is attention. Relentless awareness aimed at what you've been avoiding. In this phase, the ego's bargains collapse. If I achieve enough, I'll be safe. If I'm loved, I'll be whole. Fire exposes the bargain as magical thinking. Then comes the washing. The surrender into feeling. What was rigid liquefies. Grief, shame, loneliness, the ache underneath the performance. People fear this stage because it feels like losing the self, but often it's only the false self dissolving. Tears are not regression. They can be intelligence returning to the body. The real danger is not emotion. It's uncontained emotion. The old texts repeat, keep the dissolution inside the vessel. Without a container, the black waters spill into addiction, reckless romance, spiritual mania, or the fantasy of disappearing. If you've ever thought, I can survive feeling this, you've touched the edge of the Nigredo. And yet, the tradition insists, the psyche is not trying to kill you. It's trying to kill what's dead in you. After the washing, a subtler movement begins. Distillation. Not escape into higher vibes, but a clarifying lift. Extracting meaning without abandoning the mess. You stop saying, I feel awful, and start seeing the pattern. An ancient theme moving through you. Abandonment, betrayal, exile, hunger for the mother, hunger for the father, the orphan's panic, the tyrant's pride. This is where myth enters as medicine. Your suffering becomes less random. You recognize you, inside a human drama older than your biography. That does to remove pain, but it changes its status. You are no longer merely broken. You are being shaped. Yet distillation can go wrong. The archetypal critic of modern spirituality points out how easily insight becomes anesthesia. Brilliant language used to avoid embodied change. You can name every complex and still live like a sleepwalker. So the work demands a test. Can the insight return to earth? Because the next movement is fixation, not stiffness, but incarnation. Meaning must harden into choices, boundaries, habits, truth-telling, the slow reordering of daily life. Otherwise, the great work remains a beautiful documentary in your head. Fixation is where many transformations fail. People fall in love with the breakthrough, then refuse the boring labor that makes it real. But the adepts insist. The stone is teat found by revelation alone. It congeals through repetition, small acts sustained over time until a new character forms. This is why the body matters. In Anatomy of the Psyche, an American analyst of alchemical symbolism argues that genuine integration must reach somatic reality, sleep, appetite, posture, sexuality, the way you move through rooms, the way you hold eye contact. If your spiritual progress does touch these layers, it's likely inflation. The ego wearing sacred clothing. Fixation can look ordinary. Returning calls you used to avoid. Cleaning the chaos you called high creativity. Ending the relationship that feeds your wound. Keeping your promises when nobody watches. It is the philosopher's salt, crystallized conscience. And then comes the operation everyone dreads, mortification. Not self-hatred, but the ego's repeated deaths. Each time reality contradicts your self-image. You see the gap between intent and impact. You meet your shadow not as an idea, but as consequences. The black phase deepens here, but it's surgical, not senseless. Mortification is the moment the heroic narrative decomposes. The psyche arranges encounters that make self-deception impossible. A betrayal you can rationalize, a mirror held up by someone you love, a failure that exposes what your ambition was hiding. The images in the old plates are grotesque, dismemberment, skulls, corpses, because the ego experiences this as death. But here's the precision. It's not you dying. It's the false sovereign in you losing its throne. The archetypal tradition emphasizes that soul is thickened through descent. You dawn to upgrade out of your darkness. You metabolize it. And the Hermetic warning returns. Do not literalize the death. The danger is taking a symbolic operation as a physical command. Self-destruction, reckless annihilation, acting out. The work is to endure the inner dying without turning it into outer catastrophe. This is where a guide, analysis, or disciplined practice becomes not a luxury, but a vessel. Because when mortification has done its work, something strange begins to happen. The opposites stop trying to exterminate each other. The psyche prepares the marriage, a conjunction that produces a third reality, neither side's victory. That third reality is the seed of the stone. The culmination is the conjunction, the inner king and queen, authority and receptivity, will and longing, mind and body, meet without domination. The old engravings show sun and moon embracing, a crowned hermaphrodite, a child born from the vessel. This is not a gender claim. It's a psychological fact. Wholeness requires containing what the ego once split apart. In the classical Hermetic dialogues, the teacher insists that the human being is a mixed creature, divine and mortal, meant to unite realms rather than flee one of them. The alchemical marriage echoes that. Spirit does not erase matter, it informs it. Matter does not imprison spirit, it grounds it. This is also where the Gnostic thread sharpens. The fall is not merely sin, it is forgetfulness. The cure is remembrance, gnosis, direct knowledge of what you are beneath conditioning. And remembrance often arrives only after the false identity has been burned, washed, and buried. The conjunction does not eliminate conflict. It changes your relationship to conflict. Instead of chaos, you gain a center that can hold paradox. You become less possessed by moods, less hypnotized by roles, less certain that your first reaction is truth. And then the Nigredo reveals its secret. Blackness was not the enemy. It was the womb. Now we can name the heart of the documentary: sacred depression. The black phase feels like a curse: loss of meaning, loss of taste, loss of direction. But the alchemical tradition treats it as an operation the psyche performs when the existing personality has become too small. In psychology and alchemy, the Zurich interpreter of symbols notes that when conscious life becomes one-sided, too moral, too rational, too successful, too spiritual, the unconscious compensates. It floods the system with what was excluded. The ego experiences this compensation as breakdown. The soul experiences it as correction. This is why sacred depression differs from ordinary sadness. It carries an uncanny intelligence. Activities that used to distract you no longer work. Praise no longer nourishes you. Old goals taste like ash. You can positive think your way back into the costume. The Hermetic image is ruthless. The matter must rot until no familiar form remains. In psychological terms, the persona collapses. The shadow rises. The question, who am I, stops being philosophical and becomes visceral. If you've entered this terrain, the goal is not to romanticize it, but to recognize its function. The psyche is dismantling what blocks a deeper life. Sacred depression often arrives in midlife, when the ego has achieved its bargains and still feels empty. The career worked, yet something died. The relationship held, yet you feel alone inside it. The spiritual practice improved you, yet you sense it has become an elegant avoidance. The blackening is the moment the psyche stops accepting substitutes. One analyst of alchemical symbolism compares it to metamorphosis. The caterpillar does degrow wings by willpower. Inside the chrysalis, it dissolves into a kind of living soup before reorganizing. The horror is part of the design. If you interrupt the dissolution, you don't save the caterpillar. You deform the process. This is where modern culture is dangerously naive. We treat pain as a mistake to correct immediately. We medicate every darkness as if it has no meaning. Sometimes relief is necessary and life-saving, yes. But sometimes premature relief aborts the very reorganization the soul is attempting. The archetypal perspective is blunt. Certain structures cannot be gently reformed. They must die. The false self built from family scripts, social performance, and protective ideals has to decompose so something more honest can appear. The ethical demand of this phase is terrifyingly simple. Stop lying to yourself. The rest follows. During the Nigredo, the psyche withdraws projections like a tide going out. You can keep blaming your partner for what you refuse to face. You can keep calling fear intuition. You can keep dressing appetite as virtue. Dreams intensify, often darker, more charged, because the unconscious is no longer negotiating politely. This is also why the phase feels isolating. You may be surrounded by people and still feel sealed behind glass. The inner world becomes louder than the outer world. A bleak thought appears. I will never return to who I was. In a sense, that's true. Nigredo destroys innocence. The innocence of believing your self-image was the whole story. The alchemical manuals warn against the classic escapes. The new relationship that promises rebirth, the geographical reset, the sudden ideology, the frantic productivity, the spiritual bypass. They call these sophistications counterfeit gold. They glitter, but they don't transmute. So what does help? A vessel and a vow. The vessel, a containing relationship and structure, analysis, honest mentorship, community, daily practices that keep you tethered to reality. The vow, to remain present without acting out, to endure the blackness long enough to hear what it's teaching. Because the Nigredo is not only destruction, it's revelation. It shows you what you actually serve. When the black phase completes enough of its work, something subtle shifts. Not happiness, more like truth returning to circulation. You start to sense an inner center that is to the ego's performance. The tradition names it the stone, the anthropos, the inner guide, images pointing to the same reality, a wholeness that includes your contradictions without collapsing into them. From the Jungian angle, this is the self, not the ego's identity, but the psyche's organizing totality. And crucially, it's not a permanent achievement. It's a relationship, a continual negotiation between conscious intention and unconscious truth. What does a person look like after enough Nigredo? Not shiny, more real. They develop a steadier ethics, less driven by approval, less terrified of being disliked. They can hold ambivalence without rushing to purge it. They stop splitting the world into saints and demons because they've met both inside themselves. Their presence becomes oddly containing. They don't panic around others, darkness, because they've survived their own. And this is where the Gnostic Jesus thread becomes practical rather than mystical. The kingdom is not a reward elsewhere, but a transformation of inner governance, no longer ruled by fear, compulsion, and persona, but by a deeper truth that can withstand suffering. So the documentary ends where the adepts always end, with a warning and an invitation. The warning: you cannot bypass the blackening. Any path that promises light without descent is selling sophistication, glittering theory, not gold. The psyche will eventually demand what was avoided: grief, shadow, embodied truth, the relinquishing of the false life. The invitation: treat your descent as data, not as a verdict. When meaning collapses, ask what meaning was made of, whose script you were living, what bargain you were obeying, what unlived truth is pressing for incarnation. Keep the work inside the vessel: structure, honest reflection, disciplined imagination, and relationship that can contain you without rescuing you from the lesson. The Hermetic teaching says the human task is to unite realms. That's why the great work is not self-improvement, it's integration. Not becoming more, but removing the false until the real can appear. If you are in the sacred depression now, you are not necessarily broken. You may be in an initiation. The darkness is not proof that you've failed. It may be proof that the old self has reached its limit. And the final paradox returns. The gold was never imported from outside. It was latent in the base matter the whole time. The work is remembering, slowly, fiercely, what you are underneath the lead.